Rain hammered the tin roof like a warning no one else could hear. The neighborhood had been silent for months. Foreclosed houses, weeds clawing through cracked driveways, curtains nailed shut. When Daniel killed the engine, the sudden quiet pressed against his chest. He almost turned back. Then it came, a sound so thin it might have been the wind, a single rasping whine that cut through the downpour. He followed it past the broken gate, shoes sinking into mud, flashlight beam trembling over peeling paint. The house stood hollow, windows gaping like dark eyes. The noise came again, desperate now, dragging him toward the backyard. There, beneath a warped porch, a heavy chain glinted in the rain. A German shepherd crouched in the shadows, ribs sharp as knuckles, eyes burning with something between terror and hope. When their eyes met, the dog flinched but didn't run. Too weak to run. Daniel swallowed hard. Someone had left this animal to die. And as the rain soaked through his jacket, he knew he couldn't walk away. The rain had already turned the street into a black river by the time Daniel swung his truck around the last corner. His wipers fought a losing battle. Every pass only smeared the stormlight across the glass. He meant to drive straight home, but a single glint caught his eye, a flash of metal behind a sagging fence, like a star struggling to stay lit. He slowed without meaning to, tires hissing over water. The neighborhood was a row of hollow lungs, windows boarded, doors kicked in, grass tall enough to whisper. When he killed the engine, the silence rushed in, thick and almost alive. Something moved inside that silence. A whine, faint and broken, slid through the roar of rain. Daniel froze, heartbeat suddenly loud. It came again, long, thin, pleading. He stepped out into the storm, boots sinking in cold mud. His flashlight beam quivered across warped siding and peeling paint. The house was a carcass, ribs of wood exposed where the porch had collapsed. He thought of turning back. Then the sound sharpened into a rasping cry. The backyard gate hung crooked, chained but loose enough to force. He pushed until the rust screamed. The beam of his light cut through the dark and found the source. Under the porch, hunched against the wind, a German shepherd lay on its side. The chain around her neck clinked when she tried to lift her head. Her coat, once thick, clung to sharp bones. Rainwater pooled beneath her ribs, rising and falling with each shallow breath. Daniel crouched, water running down his collar. "Hey, easy," he whispered, voice barely carrying over the storm. The dog flinched but didn't back away. She didn't have the strength. Up close he saw raw skin where the chain had rubbed, eyes dulled to a fading ember. The smell of rust and damp fur filled the air. He reached slowly, palm open. She twitched a weak protest, then went still. Lightning flickered, bleaching everything white for an instant. Daniel's stomach tightened. Whoever had left her here hadn't planned on coming back. He slid his jacket from his shoulders and eased it over her trembling body. "I've got you," he murmured, though he wasn't sure she heard. The cold metal of the chain burned his fingers as he checked the lock. Corroded, immovable. He needed tools, needed help, but the storm swallowed cell signals whole. Her breathing hitched, a wet, fragile sound that made his chest ache. Another flash of lightning. Daniel looked at the empty windows above them and felt the night close in. The rain was relentless, but the quiet between the dog's breaths was worse. He pressed his hand gently against her side, willing the rhythm to hold. Somewhere in the darkness a door slammed, or maybe it was only the wind. He didn't move. If he left now, even for a minute, he knew she might not be alive when he returned. Daniel's knees ached from crouching, but he didn't dare shift his weight. The dog's breathing came in thin, rattling threads, each one a question mark. Rain sheeted across the yard, pooling around his boots and soaking the jacket he had draped over her. He tried his phone again. No bars, only the spinning icon of failure. Somewhere in the distance, thunder rolled like a slow drum. He studied the lock through the flashlight's unsteady glow. Rust had sealed it like stone. The chain disappeared beneath the porch, wedged tight in a crack of rotting wood. He tugged once, twice. The metal scraped but held. The dog whimpered, a sound so faint it seemed to come from inside his own chest. "You're okay. I'm not leaving." He wasn't sure if he spoke for her or himself. He scanned the yard for anything that could cut metal. A bent shovel leaned against the fence, handle split, blade dull. He grabbed it anyway and wedged the tip into the padlock's hinge. The first strike bounced off, sending a jolt through his palms. He tried again, harder. Rust flaked like brown snow, but the lock refused. Lightning cracked close, blinding white. For a heartbeat, he thought he saw someone in an upper window, a silhouette watching. When his vision cleared, the window was empty, black and dripping. He felt the hairs rise along his arms. The dog shifted suddenly, a weak spasm that rattled the chain. Her eyes fluttered open, cloudy but pleading. Daniel dropped the shovel and crouched beside her. "Stay with me, please." He pulled the jacket tighter around her, feeling the tremor in her skin. Another attempt. He braced the shovel, pressed with everything he had. Metal groaned, then snapped with a sharp metallic cry. The chain slackened, a sudden freedom. Daniel almost fell backward with relief. He slid the collar off carefully. The skin beneath was raw and wet, the fur matted with blood. He whispered steady nonsense. Soft syllables meant only to fill the space between her fragile breaths. When he tried to lift her, she tensed, then sagged against him, a bundle of cold weight. Mud sucked at his knees as he eased her into his arms. She smelled of rain and iron. The gate fought him again on the way out, screeching like it wanted the night to know. He kicked it shut behind him and half ran to the truck. Each step felt heavier, the dog's body limp against his chest. Inside the cab, he laid her across the passenger seat, heart hammering as he turned the key. The engine roared alive. He cranked the heat, rubbing her ears with chilled fingers. "Hold on," he whispered. Her chest barely rose. A cough, wet and shallow, escaped her throat. Then silence. Daniel pressed 2 fingers to her side. The faintest pulse fluttered once, twice, then faltered. Rain hammered the windshield as he slammed the truck into gear, tires hissing through the flooded street. Somewhere behind them, the empty house vanished into darkness, but the sound of that failing heartbeat followed him into the storm. The storm turned the road into a moving river, each splash of water against the truck like a new countdown. Daniel kept one hand on the wheel, the other pressed to the shepherd's ribs. The rise and fall beneath his fingers felt faint as breath on glass. Every few seconds he murmured her name, though she had none yet, because silence seemed too dangerous. The dashboard lights flickered as a gust shoved the truck sideways. He corrected hard, tires skidding before gripping the slick asphalt. His phone finally found a weak signal. He jabbed at the screen, calling the only 24-hour animal clinic he could remember. Static swallowed the first words of the receptionist. "This is Daniel," he shouted over the roar. "German shepherd, barely breathing. I'm 10 minutes out. Maybe less. Drive safe," the voice said, crisp through the crackle. "Keep her warm. Don't let her neck twist. We'll be ready." He tossed the phone aside and focused on the rhythm of the wipers, willing them to keep pace with the flood. Streetlights passed like brief moons. Twice he thought he felt her chest stop. He pressed harder, counting 1, 2, until a faint flutter returned. A flash of red appeared ahead, a downed power line whipping in the storm, sparks spitting across the pavement. He braked hard, heart slamming. The truck fishtailed, water surging against the doors. He swerved onto a side street, tires sloshing through water deep enough to spray over the hood. The dog stirred, a tiny jerk of a paw, as if jolted by the sudden turn. Daniel almost cried from relief. "That's it, stay with me," he whispered. The detour wound through a maze of dark houses, every intersection a pool of uncertainty. He caught sight of his own reflection in the side window, rain-streaked face, eyes wide and bloodshot. The image felt like someone else entirely. A green highway sign finally emerged through the curtain of water, pointing toward the veterinary hospital. He pushed the truck harder, engine whining. His hand never left the dog's side. Then, without warning, she went still, utterly still. No flutter beneath his palm, no movement of air. Panic ripped through him. He shouted her silent name, the word breaking apart in the roar. He pulled to the shoulder, slammed the truck in park, and leaned across the seat. "Breathe," he begged, pressing fingers to her chest. Nothing. He rubbed her sternum, tried again. Second stretched, viscous, and endless. A tiny gasp broke the void. Then another. Weak but there. Daniel sagged forward, forehead against the steering wheel trembling. Headlights bloomed behind him. An approaching vehicle. He pulled back onto the road, throat tight, following the glow of the clinic's illuminated sign, barely visible through the rain. "Almost there," he whispered, voice hoarse. "Almost there." The hospital's parking lot appeared like an island of light in the storm. Daniel swung the truck toward the emergency entrance, brakes squealing as he skidded to a stop. Figures in scrubs burst from the sliding doors, faces set and urgent, as he threw open the passenger door to the night. The sliding doors yawned open as Daniel carried the limp shepherd inside. Warm, sterile air hit him like a wall, but the dog's body stayed frighteningly cold against his chest. A nurse hurried ahead, clearing a path through the gleaming hallway while a vet in green scrubs matched Daniel's pace. "Put her here," the vet said, gesturing to a steel table under harsh white lights. Daniel eased the dog down, his jacket falling away to reveal raw, chafed skin where the chain had bitten deep. The vet's eyes tightened. "How long was she like this?" I don't know. Found her an hour ago." She stopped breathing twice on the way. "Get IV lines and warm saline," the vet called to the team. Gloves snapped, machines beeped. Daniel stepped back, chest heaving. The dog lay motionless except for the shallow rise of her ribs. A tech clipped an oxygen mask over her muzzle, while another threaded a catheter into a vein no thicker than thread. "Severe dehydration, hypothermia," the vet murmured. "Blood pressure's critical. We need to stabilize before we even think about labs." Daniel hovered near the door, fingers twitching with the urge to help. Every beep of the monitor felt like a verdict. The storm outside thudded against the roof, a reminder of the night that had delivered her here. A sudden alarm screamed. The vet snapped toward the monitor. "Pulse dropping. Epinephrine, now." Daniel's breath caught as a syringe slid into the IV. For a long, merciless moment, nothing happened. Then a tremor shivered through the dog's body, a faint twitch that traveled from paw to ear. The monitor's tone steadied, soft but present. "Good girl," the vet whispered almost to herself. "She's fighting." Daniel pressed his knuckles to his mouth, eyes burning. He thought of the empty house, the rusted chain, the way her gaze had met his through the rain. "She needs a name for the chart," a nurse said gently. Daniel swallowed. "Not yet," he managed. "Not until she's safe." Minutes blurred. Fluids dripped, warm air hummed from a heat lamp, and the dog's breathing found a fragile rhythm. The vet finally straightened. "She's not out of danger," she said, meeting Daniel's eyes. "The next 12 hours are critical. Organ stress, possible infection. We'll keep her on oxygen and fluids, but it could go either way." Daniel nodded. Words caught somewhere behind his throat. He stayed as they wheeled her to an intensive care kennel, his jacket still wrapped around her like a promise. Through the glass he watched the slow rise and fall of her chest, the tiny fog of each breath against the mask. When the door clicked shut, the room felt suddenly enormous. Outside, thunder rolled again. Softer now, but insistent, as if the storm refused to end. Daniel pressed a hand to the cool glass and whispered, "Please hold on." The dog's eyelids fluttered once, barely perceptible, before settling closed. And then the monitors beeped in a slow, uncertain rhythm that kept Daniel rooted, afraid to look away in case the next breath never came. Morning seeped into the clinic like a pale confession. Daniel hadn't moved from the plastic chair outside the intensive care room, his back stiff, his clothes still smelling of rain and iron. Nurses drifted past with soft-soled shoes and quiet voices. Every so often the door opened and a slice of antiseptic air slipped out, cold enough to raise gooseflesh on his arms. Beyond the glass, the shepherd lay beneath a warming blanket, oxygen mask fogging with each faint exhale. Machines hummed in patient rhythm, a fragile orchestra holding the night at bay. A young vet tech approached with a clipboard. "You should get some rest," she whispered. "It could be a long day." Daniel shook his head. "I'll stay." She hesitated, then left him to the silence. Through the window he studied every detail, the way the blanket lifted just enough to prove she was still breathing, the slow pulse at her shaved foreleg where the IV disappeared. Each flicker of movement steadied and frightened him at once. He pressed his palms together, forehead resting against them, and let memory slide in. The first flash of metal in the storm, the weight of her body when he carried her. How small she had felt, despite her breed's strength. Hours stretched. A doctor finally stepped out, eyes ringed with fatigue. "She's holding steady," he said, voice low, "but her organs took a beating. Kidney values are borderline. We're fighting dehydration and infection. The next 12 hours remain critical." "Is there anything I can do?" Daniel asked. "Talk to her," the doctor replied with a faint smile. "Sometimes it helps." Inside the room, Daniel sat beside the kennel. The scent of disinfectant mixed with the warm animal musk of damp fur. He slid a hand through the small gap in the door until his fingertips brushed the edge of the blanket. "You're stronger than this," he murmured. "I saw it in your eyes." The dog's ear twitched, a movement so slight he almost doubted it. He kept talking anyway. About the storm, about a field near his house where the sun hit golden in late afternoon, about the sound of rain on a roof when you're safe inside. His voice filled the sterile space, carrying fragments of a life he hoped she'd know. A sudden cough rattled her chest, sharp and wet. Alarms blinked red. Daniel's heart leapt as nurses rushed in, adjusting lines and oxygen. For a breathless span, the monitor stuttered into erratic beeps. "Stay with me," he whispered, gripping the kennel edge until his knuckles whitened. The vet injected a clear fluid, eyes fixed on the screen. The wild rhythm softened, steadied. One of the nurses exhaled. "She's a fighter," the vet said quietly. Daniel's knees went weak with relief. He kept his hand inside the door, touching the blanket, anchoring them both. But even as calm returned, he knew the battle wasn't finished. The doctor's warning echoed. The next 12 hours remain critical. And the long, uncertain day had only just begun. The hours slid by in a strange half-light, the kind that blurs time until you forget what the sky is doing outside. Daniel stayed beside the kennel, the cold metal of the chair imprinting his spine. Nurses came and went with quiet efficiency, checking fluids, adjusting the oxygen mask, murmuring readings he barely understood. Each soft beep of the monitor carved a notch into his memory. Mid-afternoon brought a fragile shift. The shepherd stirred beneath the warming blanket, a faint ripple along her flank. Daniel leaned forward, breath catching. Her eyes opened, cloudy but searching, and for the first time he saw the glint of amber beneath the haze. "Hey," he whispered, sliding his fingers through the door gap. "You're safe. You made it through the night." Her gaze held his for a heartbeat, then drifted away as if the effort cost too much. Still, it was enough to ignite a spark of hope he hadn't allowed himself. A veterinarian named Dr. Singh entered, chart in hand. "She's stabilizing," he said, eyes kind but cautious. "Kidney function is low but improving. Dehydration's our biggest fight. We'll keep fluids running and monitor for organ stress. If she keeps this up, she might have a real chance." Daniel exhaled, a breath he felt he'd been holding since the storm. "What happens next?" "Slow recovery," Singh replied, "and we'll need to check for infections. She's young, 2, maybe 3. That works in her favor." When the doctor left, Daniel pulled his chair closer. The sterile room softened around him as he began to talk again. He told her about his grandmother's garden, about the smell of wet soil after a summer rain, about the sound of cicadas on hot nights. The words were less for her and more for the silence, but he imagined her ears catching fragments, weaving them into comfort. Evening edged in. The clinic lights dimmed to a twilight glow. A tech brought coffee and a blanket, urging him to rest. He sipped the bitter warmth, but kept his eyes on the gentle rise and fall of the dog's chest. Around midnight, a soft thump startled him, the faint wag of a tail against the kennel floor. He blinked, unsure at first if he'd dreamed it. Then it came again, slow but certain, a whisper of life returning. Daniel's throat tightened. He slid his hand through the gap, and this time she moved toward it, nose brushing his fingers with the lightest touch. "That's it," he said, voice trembling. "That's my girl." The monitor kept its steady rhythm as her tail gave one more tired thump. It was the smallest of victories, but it felt like the world tilting toward hope. Daniel leaned back, exhaustion finally catching him, yet he couldn't stop the quiet smile. The night stretched on, but for the first time since the storm, he believed she might see another dawn. By the time a week had passed, the rhythm of the clinic had become a second heartbeat for Daniel. Morning rounds, soft greetings from the nurses, the antiseptic scent that clung to his clothes. Each detail etched itself into a routine he never expected to need. The German shepherd, no longer a lifeless bundle, now lifted her head when he entered. Her amber eyes followed him with a quiet intelligence that felt older than the days she'd endured. He had started calling her Luna, a name that carried the memory of the storm-lit night when he found her. The staff used it without question, jotting it neatly on her chart. Luna. Moonlight in a house of shadows. That morning he brought a book, its pages swollen from the damp air of his truck. He settled on the floor beside her recovery kennel, back against the cool wall. "You missed quite the story yesterday," he said, flipping it open. His voice filled the room in a low, steady cadence. Luna rested her muzzle on the edge of the blanket, ears twitching with each familiar syllable. Between chapters he offered her small pieces of boiled chicken approved by the vet. She took them gingerly, tongue brushing his fingers like a question. Each bite felt like a triumph. The IV still fed fluids into her vein, but her own appetite returned in slow, precious sparks. Dr. Singh stopped by during rounds. "Our weight's up by a pound," he said, a hint of a smile softening his professional calm. "Kidneys are responding. She's not out of the woods, but this is progress." Daniel nodded, relief mingling with pride. "She's a fighter." "She had help," Singh replied, giving him a look that was both grateful and knowing. Later that afternoon, sunlight filtered through the blinds, throwing warm stripes across the sterile floor. Luna shifted, pushing her nose through the small opening of the kennel door until it nudged his knee. Daniel reached out, palm open. She pressed against it, a gentle weight that carried an unexpected trust. He stroked her fur, now softer from careful washing, and felt the slow beat of her heart beneath his fingertips. The memory of that first night, the cold chain, the silence between breaths, flashed sharp and fleeting. He whispered, "You're safe now," though part of him still feared the fragility of those words. The clinic around them buzzed with quiet life, ringing phones, distant barks, the rhythmic click of nurses' shoes. But in that small square of sunlight, time thinned to a single moment. Man and dog breathing in quiet synchrony, each grounding the other. Outside, a breeze rattled the clinic's metal awning, a softer echo of the storm that had brought them together. Daniel closed the book, content to sit in silence, feeling Luna's steady warmth against his hand, a fragile miracle stitched from rain and persistence. Night brought a sudden change. What had been a steady recovery turned without warning into a quiet emergency. Daniel had dozed in the chair beside Luna's kennel, the soft hiss of the oxygen a lullaby, when a sharp beeping jolted him upright. The monitor flashed a warning, temperature rising fast. A nurse hurried over, eyes narrowing at the numbers. "Fever, high," she said, already paging Dr. Singh. Daniel pressed his palm to the kennel door. Luna's ears twitched weakly, but her eyes were glassy, distant. The warmth radiating from her body pulsed like a furnace. Dr. Singh arrived within minutes, coat half-buttoned, expression tight. "This can happen," he said quickly, checking vitals. "Could be an infection from the original wounds. We need to act before it spikes higher." Two techs moved with crisp precision. A new IV line, a syringe of broad-spectrum antibiotics, cooling pads beneath her belly. Daniel felt useless, a shadow among professionals. He whispered her name as they worked, voice low but insistent. "Stay with me, Luna. You've come too far." The fever climbed anyway. The monitor beeped faster, a nervous staccato. Singh adjusted the drip, called for more fluids. Sweat gathered at Daniel's temples despite the chill of the room. He thought of the storm again, the helplessness of watching her chest rise and fall in the dark, and felt that same hollow fear clawing back. Minutes dragged like hours. Luna gave a faint, breathy whine, her body trembling. Daniel knelt, sliding his fingers through the narrow opening until they brushed the curve of her jaw. Her fur was damp and hot beneath his touch. "I'm here," he murmured, the words trembling with each syllable. "You're not alone." Singh injected another dose, his voice steady. This should break it if her system can handle the fight. For a long time, nothing changed. The beeps blurred into a single ringing note in Daniel's head. He counted her breaths, terrified each one might be the last. Then, as if the fever had burned itself out, the numbers on the monitor began to dip. Tentative at first, then steadily. A collective breath filled the room. Singh offered a small nod. "She's responding." "That's a good sign." Daniel sagged against the wall, every muscle quivering with relief. Luna shifted slightly, pressing her nose once more toward the gap where his fingers waited. He stroked the side of her face, feeling the heat slowly ebb. "She's tough," Singh said quietly, almost to himself. Daniel met his gaze. "She always has been." The staff withdrew, leaving a softer silence. Daniel remained kneeling, forehead resting against the cool steel of the kennel door, listening to the steadier rhythm of her breathing. Outside, the night wind rattled the awning again, but the sound no longer carried threat, only a memory of the storm that had first bound them together. When Luna finally drifted into an easy sleep, Daniel stayed beside her, the adrenaline fading into a quiet gratitude. The crisis had passed, at least for now, and he allowed himself a single whispered promise. "We're almost home." 2 weeks later, the clinic doors opened to a bright afternoon. and Luna stepped into the sunlight as if testing the idea of freedom. Her gait was cautious but sure, paws pressing the concrete with a soft rhythm that matched Daniel's heartbeat. He held the leash loosely, letting her set the pace. The breeze carried a warmth that smelled of cut grass and distant rain, a gentler echo of the storm that had first brought them together. The adoption papers rustled in the folder under his arm, official proof of what they both already knew. The staff had cheered when he signed them, a quiet celebration of the long nights and fragile victories that led to this moment. Dr. Singh had offered a final set of instructions. Diet, exercise, watch for infection, but his parting words carried more weight than the list. She chose to fight, he'd said, resting a hand on Luna's head. Now it's your turn to give her a life worth that fight. They paused at the edge of the parking lot, where a patch of grass caught the afternoon sun. Luna lowered her nose to the earth, inhaling deeply, tail giving a slow wag. Daniel crouched beside her, brushing a hand over her coat. It felt thicker now, glossy beneath the golden light. He remembered the slick mud of that first night, the sharp bones beneath damp fur, and felt an ache of wonder at the difference. "Ready to go home?" he asked. She looked up, eyes bright, as if the word carried meaning. The drive was quiet, a companionable silence broken only by the hum of the engine and the occasional sigh from the passenger seat. Daniel glanced over to find her watching the world slide by, trees bending in the wind, rooftops glinting with late sun. Each mile seemed to shed another layer of the darkness they had both carried. At his house, the door creaked open to a space he hadn't realized was waiting for someone else. Luna padded across the threshold without hesitation, nose twitching at the scent of wood and warmth. Daniel set down a new bed in the corner, though she ignored it at first, exploring each room with deliberate curiosity. In the kitchen, he filled a bowl with water, the simple sound of pouring a quiet benediction. Luna drank slowly, then sat back and gave a small chuff as if approving the place. Daniel laughed under his breath, the sound surprising him. As dusk settled, he opened the back door to a yard glowing with the last amber streaks of day. Luna stepped onto the grass, tail lifting in a gentle arc. She trotted a few yards, then turned to look back at him, eyes catching the fading light. For a moment, Daniel simply watched. The healthy stretch of her legs, the easy grace of movement that had once been unthinkable. The memory of that storm, of a chain cutting into raw skin, flickered through his mind. He felt the past loosen its hold. Luna barked softly, a sound bright enough to carry through the settling evening, and Daniel followed her into the golden dark. Night draped the house in a quiet that felt earned. Daniel left the back door open to the soft hum of crickets and the faint scent of rain. Luna lay curled near the couch, chest rising and falling in a steady rhythm that still amazed him. Only weeks ago he'd been counting each fragile breath in a sterile clinic. Now the sound was easy, a promise of ordinary days. He settled onto the floor beside her, cross-legged, a cup of tea cooling between his palms. The lamplight traced a gentle sheen along her coat, no longer patchy but thick and warm. When he reached to stroke her side, she shifted just enough for his hand to find the place where bone had once jutted sharply. Muscle filled it now. Life had returned quietly, like a tide. Outside, the wind picked up and rattled the old fence. Luna's ears flicked, but she didn't rise. Instead, she leaned her head into his thigh, a soft weight that anchored them both. Daniel let the silence stretch. In that hush, he felt the long road behind them. The empty house, the rusted chain, the cold shock of finding her barely alive. Each memory slid through him, painful and luminous all at once. He thought of what Dr. Singh had said. She chose to fight. Daniel knew now that the fight wasn't only hers. It had pulled something awake in him, a steadiness he hadn't realized he'd lost. Rescue, he understood, was a kind of mirror. You save a life and discover pieces of your own. Luna stirred and stood, padding toward the open door. The moon cast a pale trail across the yard, and she stepped into it with quiet confidence. Daniel followed barefoot, the grass cool beneath his feet. She lifted her head to the night sky, nose twitching at scents carried on the breeze. Then she turned back, eyes reflecting the silver light, and in that gaze he felt an unspoken question, one that asked nothing more than presence. He knelt, arms open. She came to him, pressing her body against his chest, the warmth of her breath a steady rhythm under the stars. The fence creaked again, but the sound no longer spoke of confinement. It was only the night settling, the world breathing with them. Daniel whispered into her fur, words he hadn't planned but knew were true. You're safe now." "We both are." The admission eased something in him, a knot that had tightened long before he found her. They stayed there until the moon climbed high and the tea cooled to silence. Above them the clouds parted, revealing a scatter of stars that seemed almost within reach. Daniel thought of others, animals, people, still waiting behind their own locked doors, and hoped someone would hear them in time. When he finally rose, Luna trotted beside him, tail brushing his leg. Together they stepped back into the warm light of the house, leaving the night to its quiet watch. And as the door closed, Daniel felt the truth settle deep. Rescue is never a single act. It is a promise lived every day to stay,